iron gate closed with a sound that felt heavier than metal. It wasn't loud. It didn't slam. But when it shut, Claire Whitmore knew something in her life had ended forever. Rain clung to the pavement outside the mansion, reflecting the city lights from the Manhattan skyline below the hill. The house behind the gate glowed warm and golden, alive with laughter and music, as if nothing had happened. As if she had never belonged there. Claire stood on the curb with one suitcase, just one. The rest of her life was still inside. Victor Langston didn't come out to walk her to the gate. He didn't need to. He had already said everything that mattered. His voice still echoed in her head, calm and dismissive, the way people speak when they believe the outcome is final. "This is my house, Claire. You should have packed sooner." She had looked at him then, searching his face for something human, for hesitation, for guilt, for the man she married. But Victor's eyes were already past her, already imagining a future where she no longer existed. Behind him, Avery Cole leaned against the marble staircase, wrapped in a silk coat that wasn't hers. She didn't say a word. She didn't have to. Her smile did all the talking. Claire hadn't screamed. She hadn't begged. She had simply nodded, as if accepting bad weather instead of betrayal. Now her phone vibrated in her hand. An iPhone screen lighting up the dark with missed calls and messages she wasn't ready to read. Her fingers trembled, not from the cold, but from the realization that this was real, that she had just been erased from the life she helped build. A car passed slowly, its headlights briefly illuminating her reflection in the gate. She barely recognized herself. The woman staring back looked smaller, older, like someone who had learned too late that love and safety are not the same thing. Inside the mansion, a toast was being made. Crystal glasses clinked. Someone laughed too loudly. Claire imagined the dining room table she had chosen, the artwork she had curated, the quiet corners where she used to read late at night with a blanket and a cup of tea. All of it continued without her, like she had been nothing more than temporary furniture. She picked up her suitcase and began to walk. Each step away from the mansion felt unreal, like she was floating through someone else's nightmare. She didn't know where she was going yet. She only knew she couldn't stay. Not on that street. Not in that version of her life. As she reached the corner, Claire stopped and looked back one last time. The house stood tall and confident against the night sky. Untouchable. Invincible. Victor believed he had won. Avery believed she had arrived. Neither of them knew the truth, because the ground beneath that mansion, the land it stood on, the foundation everyone took for granted, had always belonged to Claire. And tonight, the woman they thought they had destroyed had just taken her first step toward taking everything back. The lobby of the Plaza Hotel smelled faintly of polished wood and quiet money. Soft piano music floated through the air, the kind meant to calm people who had never truly lost anything. Claire Whitmore stood just inside the revolving door, her suitcase beside her, rain still clinging to the hem of her coat. She didn't belong here tonight, not like this. At the front desk, the clerk smiled politely, the way people do when they sense discomfort but don't ask questions. Claire handed over the credit card Victor had added her to years ago. Her hand shook only slightly. She told herself it was the cold. The terminal beeped once, then again. "I'm sorry, Ma'am," the clerk said gently. "The card has been declined." For a moment the room tilted. Claire felt heat rush to her face as a few heads turned. She swallowed hard, reached into her bag and pulled out another card. This one worked. Barely. In the elevator surrounded by mirrors, she finally looked at herself. Mascara smudged beneath tired eyes. Hair pinned back in a style chosen to please someone who had already replaced her. She pressed her forehead lightly against the cool glass as the doors slid shut. The room was quiet when she entered. Too quiet. The kind of silence that forces thoughts to speak louder. Claire dropped her suitcase by the door and sank onto the carpet, her back against the bed. That was when the tears came. Not loud, not dramatic, just steady, exhausted sobs that seemed to come from somewhere deep in her chest. Her phone buzzed again. Victor. She turned the screen face down. Instead, she reached into her bag and pulled out a small, worn paperback. Meditations by Marcus Aurelius. The corners were bent, the spine cracked. It had been her father's. She opened it to a page marked years ago, though she didn't remember doing it. You have power over your mind, not outside events. Claire read the line again and again until her breathing slowed, until the panic loosened its grip. She wasn't safe, she wasn't secure, but she was still herself. Outside the window, the city glowed indifferent and eternal. Somewhere across town, Victor was celebrating his freedom. Avery was already imagining her future. Claire lay back on the bed, staring at the ceiling, knowing one thing with absolute clarity. This was the lowest point, and nothing that came next could hurt more than this night. Morning arrived without mercy. Claire woke to the sound of traffic below her window, horns and engines colliding with the quiet ache in her chest. For a brief second, she forgot where she was. Then the unfamiliar ceiling, the muted luxury of the hotel room, and the weight in her stomach reminded her of everything. Her phone lay on the nightstand, dark and accusing. When she picked it up, the message was already waiting. Victor Langston. I've sent you the divorce paperwork. This doesn't have to be ugly. Sign it, and we can both move on like adults. Attached was a PDF. Claire sat up slowly, pulling the blanket tighter around herself as she opened the file. The document was long, precise, polite. Every sentence is carefully designed to sound fair, generous even. Victor would provide a short transition allowance. He would wish her well. He would release her from any future obligations. Her eyes skimmed until they stopped. Clause 14.2. Waiver of property and land claims. She read it once, then again. By signing, Claire would relinquish any present or future claim to real estate associated with the marriage, including land, structures, and derivative interests, known or unknown. The words felt clinical, harmless, but something about them made her throat tighten. Known or unknown. Victor wasn't just asking for a divorce. He was asking her to disappear. Her finger hovered over the screen. She imagined how easy it would be to sign, to be done, to stop fighting, stop hurting, stop feeling like she was drowning in a life that no longer wanted her. She told herself she wasn't greedy. She didn't want his money, she just wanted peace. Her phone buzzed again. Victor, this is the cleanest way. Don't complicate things. Clean. Simple. Final. Claire closed her eyes, pressing her thumb into her palm until it hurt. Something deep inside her resisted. Quiet but insistent. A warning she couldn't explain. She thought of her mother's voice, distant and cold. She thought of the land her father used to talk about, not as wealth, but as responsibility. She locked the phone and set it down. Outside, the city moved on without her permission. People hurried to work. Coffee cups steamed. Lives continued. Claire stood by the window, breathing slowly, grounding herself in the moment. She wasn't ready to sign away her life just to make someone else comfortable. Not yet. And somewhere beneath Victor's confidence, beneath his calm threats and polished language, Claire sensed it. This paper wasn't protected. It was a trap. Claire left the hotel just before noon. The sky was clear, painfully beautiful, as if the world had decided today was not the day to acknowledge her grief. She walked several blocks before calling the one person she had avoided since the night everything fell apart. Her mother answered on the third ring. I know, Margaret Whitmore said, before Claire could speak. Her voice was steady, controlled, as if she were discussing a delayed flight instead of her daughter's collapsed marriage. I saw the photos. Claire stopped walking. Cars rushed past, their noise blurring into a low hum. Then you know he threw me out, she said. Her voice cracked despite her effort to keep it calm. I don't have anywhere to go. There was a pause, no hesitation, calculation. You have somewhere to go, Margaret replied. You always have, but you don't need rescuing. The words hit harder than Victor's cruelty. I didn't call to be lectured, Claire said, heat rising in her chest. He sent me papers. He wants me to sign everything away. And will you? Her mother asked. Claire closed her eyes. I don't know. Then don't, Margaret said simply. That's it, Claire asked. That's all you have to say? Silence stretched between them, thick and uncomfortable. When Margaret finally spoke again, her tone had changed, softer but no less firm. You married a man who needed to feel powerful, she said. If I step in now, he'll tell himself he was right about you, that you survived because of someone else. You don't need that story following you for the rest of your life. Claire felt tears burn behind her eyes. So, you're just going to let me fall? No, Margaret said. I'm letting you see. Claire leaned against a brick wall, her legs suddenly weak. She thought of all the years she had tried to prove she could build a life on her own terms, how carefully she had avoided appearing dependent. And now, when she finally needed help, it was being withheld on purpose. Call me when you're done pretending this was just a bad marriage, Margaret continued, when you're ready to understand what he actually took from you and what he didn't do. The line went dead. Claire stood there long after the call ended, phone pressed uselessly to her ear. Anger came first, then confusion, and beneath it all, a strange, unsettling feeling that her mother knew something she didn't. For the first time since being thrown out, Claire wasn't just hurt. She was afraid. By the third day, Claire understood something she hadn't expected. Losing her home hurt. Losing her husband shattered her. But losing her reputation felt like suffocating in public. She sat alone at a corner table inside a Starbucks on Lexington Avenue, hands wrapped around a paper cup that had already gone cold. The cafe was crowded with people in tailored coats and hurried conversations, the kind of place where no one looks twice until they do. Two women stood near the pickup counter, their voices low but careless. Did you see the article? One asked. Yeah, I heard she was difficult. Always wanted more. Well, he's better off now. Claire didn't look up. She didn't need to. She knew they were talking about her. Her phone vibrated on the table. Notifications stacked one after another, headlines, social posts, carefully worded statements released by Victor's publicist, all saying the same thing without saying it directly. Victor Langston, successful entrepreneur, moves forward after a challenging marriage. Challenging. That was the word they chose to replace betrayal. Photos followed. Victor looked composed, Avery beside him, hand resting lightly on his arm, her expression sympathetic, almost humble. The comments were worse, strangers dissecting Claire's face, her posture, her worth, calling her ungrateful, calling her lucky she got anything at all. She scrolled until her vision blurred, then locked the screen. This was deliberate. Victor wasn't just leaving her. He was rewriting her. Claire stared into her coffee, watching the surface tremble with her breath. She remembered dinners she had hosted, conversations she had smoothed over, connections she had helped Victor make without ever attaching her name to them. All the invisible labor, now erased with a press release. A laugh burst from the table beside her. Sharp, carefree. It startled her. Life was moving on with cruel efficiency. For a moment she considered disappearing, changing her number, leaving the city, letting Victor have his story if it meant the noise would stop. Then she thought of the divorce papers, the clause she hadn't signed, the way Victor had assumed she would fold quietly, grateful for crumbs. Her grip tightened around the cup until the cardboard creased. This wasn't just gossip, it was pressure. Public humiliation designed to make her desperate enough to comply, to sign, to vanish. Claire stood abruptly, chair scraping against the floor. A few heads turned. She didn't care. She walked out into the cold air, heart pounding, mind racing. They were trying to break her. And for the first time since the night she was thrown out, Claire realized something important. If she stayed silent much longer, they just might succeed. The email arrived just after midnight. Claire was lying on her side in the dark hotel room, scrolling without really seeing, when her phone buzzed softly. She almost ignored it. At that hour, nothing good ever came from new messages, but the subject line made her sit up. Ethan Brooks. It's been a long time. Her breath caught. She hadn't spoken to Ethan in years, not since before Victor, not since life had taken a sharp turn toward luxury and compromise. Ethan had known her before the mansion, before the curated dinners and careful smiles, back when she was just Claire. She opened the email. I saw the news. I'm sorry. I won't pretend to know what you're going through, but there's something you need to hear. Something about your family's land. If you're willing, call me. No explanation, no details, just urgency. Claire stared at the screen, heart pounding. Her first instinct was suspicion. Everyone wanted something from her now. Sympathy had become a currency. But something about Ethan's tone felt different, unpolished, direct, like him. She hesitated only a moment before pressing the call. Claire, Ethan said when he answered, his voice steady but unmistakably tense. Thank you for calling. I don't have much left to lose, she replied quietly, so just tell me. There was a pause, the sound of papers shifting on his end. Do you remember the Whitmore Land Trust? He asked. The name stirred something distant and familiar. Childhood memories. Her father talked about land the way other people talked about faith. Vaguely, Claire said. My mom handled all of that. I never wanted to be involved. Ethan exhaled. That trust didn't disappear, Claire, and it wasn't symbolic. It owns the land beneath the mansion Victor claims is his. Her grip tightened on the phone. That's not possible, she whispered. Victor says a lot of things, Ethan cut in gently, but land records don't care about confidence. They care about signatures, and yours is still there. The room felt suddenly smaller, warmer, like the air had shifted. What are you saying? Claire asked. I'm saying the house may be his project, Ethan replied, but the ground it stands on? That's a different story. No one bothered to explain to you. Silence stretched between them, thick with implications. For the first time in days, Claire felt something unfamiliar rise in her chest. Not hope, clarity, and with it, the terrifying understanding that Victor might not have taken everything after all. Claire met Ethan the next morning in a quiet cafe near Bryant Park, the kind of place where conversations dissolved into background noise. He was already there when she arrived, seated near the window, a folder resting beside his coffee. He looked older than she remembered. Not tired, just sharpened by years of seeing how power actually worked. They didn't hug, they didn't reminisce. There wasn't time for that. Ethan slid the folder across the table. I want you to understand this before you feel anything about it, he said. Anger can come later. Inside were documents, deeds, trust summaries, legal language dense enough to intimidate anyone who wasn't trained to read between the lines. Claire skimmed at first, then slowed, her pulse quickening with every page. This land, Ethan said quietly, tapping one document, was placed into an irrevocable trust by your father. Your mother became a trustee. You were named the primary beneficiary. Claire frowned. Then why have I spent my entire marriage believing I owned nothing? Because you chose distance, Ethan replied, and because someone benefited from you staying uninformed. He explained it carefully. The mansion Victor built was legally his, on paper. But the land beneath it had never transferred, never sold, never merged. Victor had built on trust-owned ground under a long-term development agreement that assumed compliance with marital and fiduciary conditions Claire had never read. Her hands began to shake. So he knew, she said. It wasn't a question. Ethan nodded once. He knew there was land involved. What he didn't know was that the trust had a reversal clause. If the marriage failed under specific circumstances, fraud, concealment, infidelity, the beneficiary's dormant rights could be activated. Claire leaned back, stunned. Memories rearranged themselves. Victor insists she never attend meetings. Victor discouraging her from talking to lawyers. Victor laughed when she asked about ownership, calling it boring paperwork. "You were never powerless," Ethan said. "You were just quiet." The weight of that settled slowly. Claire felt foolish, then furious, then something colder and more focused than either. "My mother," she said. "She knew all of this." "Yes," Ethan replied. "And she knew you'd never believe it unless you hit bottom first." Claire closed the folder. Outside, people crossed the park without noticing her life-changing direction. For days, she had believed she was surviving loss. Now she understood something far more dangerous. She had been standing on leverage the entire time. And Victor had just given her legal permission to use it. The truth didn't bring relief. It brought dread. Claire left the cafe with the folder pressed against her chest, the city moving around her as if nothing had changed. But everything had. Every memory now carries a second meaning. Every decision she had made inside that marriage suddenly felt manipulated, engineered with patience. That night, she sat alone in her hotel room, the documents spread across the bed. Ethan's words echoed in her mind, but so did Victor's voice, smooth, confident, always a step ahead. She found it near the bottom of the file, a single page. Her signature, dated 3 years earlier. Claire's breath caught as she stared at it. The ink was unmistakably hers. Signed during a renovation rush, mixed into a stack of approvals Victor had placed in front of her after a long dinner. She remembered that night. The wine, the laughter, the way he had kissed her forehead and said, "Just formalities, Claire. You trust me, right?" She had. The document wasn't a transfer of ownership. It was worse. A temporary waiver, a voluntary suspension of beneficiary authority, allowing Victor to operate without interference for the stability of the marriage. At the time, it had sounded noble, supportive, harmless. But there it was in black and white. She had silenced herself. Claire sank onto the edge of the bed, the weight of it pressing down on her chest. The trust existed. The land was hers. But this signature meant she had willingly stepped back. Victor hadn't taken everything. She had handed him the room to maneuver. Her phone rang. "Ethan." "I saw it," she said before he could speak. "I know," he replied quietly, "but keep reading." Claire flipped the page with trembling fingers. There it was, a clause she had never been shown, buried beneath dense language and footnotes. The waiver was conditional. It required good faith, transparency, fidelity. If the marriage dissolved due to deception or misconduct, the waiver expired automatically. Claire laughed once, sharp and breathless. It sounded almost hysterical. "He cheated," she said. "He lied. He humiliated me." "Yes," Ethan said, "and by doing that he gave you your voice back." Claire closed her eyes, letting the realization settle. For weeks, Victor had been pressuring her to sign new papers, papers that would replace this one, papers that would erase that clause entirely. He hadn't been offering peace. He had been racing the clock. Claire looked down at her hands, no longer shaking. For the first time since the night she was thrown out, she felt something solid beneath her feet. She hadn't lost her power. She had delayed it. And Victor, convinced she was broken, had never seen the deadline coming. The charity gala was everything Victor loved. High ceilings, soft lighting, familiar faces pretending not to watch each other. It was held on 5th Avenue, inside a venue designed to make success feel permanent. Claire knew the room well. She had helped plan events like this for years, always standing just outside the spotlight. Tonight, she watched from the edge. Victor entered first, confident as ever, his tailored suit fitting him like certainty. A moment later, Avery Cole appeared at his side. She wore confidence like jewelry, her hand resting possessively on Victor's arm, her smile practiced and radiant. Whispers followed them, curious, approving. Avery laughed easily, leaning in as Victor spoke to donors and investors. She looked exactly like the woman people expected to see next to him. Younger, polished, unburdened by history. Every gesture said the same thing. I belong here now. Claire remained unnoticed near the back of the room, a glass of water in her hand. She hadn't come to confront anyone. She hadn't come to be seen. She was there to observe. At one point, Avery lifted her wrist as she spoke, drawing attention to a delicate bracelet catching the light. Claire recognized it instantly. Not because it was expensive, but because she had once wrapped it carefully in tissue paper and placed it in a drawer. A gift Victor had claimed he never liked. So that's how this would be done, Claire thought. Not stolen outright. Reassigned. Across the room, Victor spotted Claire. His expression froze for half a second before smoothing back into polite surprise. He excused himself and walked toward her, his smile tight. You shouldn't be here, he said quietly. Claire met his gaze, calm, unmoved. Neither should she replied, glancing at Avery. Victor's jaw tightened. Don't do this. I'm not, Claire said. I'm just watching. Avery approached then, curiosity sharpening her smile. Claire, right, she said lightly. I've heard so much. I'm sure, Claire replied. Avery's eyes flicked briefly to the bracelet, then back to Claire's face, searching for jealousy, finding none unsettled her. Later that night, as Claire left the gala, she checked her phone. A message from Ethan waited. He's panicking. He tried to move assets this afternoon. Claire slipped her phone back into her pocket and stepped into the night air. Behind her, music swelled and laughter echoed. Ahead of her, the city stretched wide and indifferent. Avery believed she had stepped into a finished story. She had no idea she was standing inside someone else's prologue. Victor didn't sleep that night. By morning, his confidence had hardened into urgency. He sat alone in his office overlooking Park Avenue, city traffic flowing below like a reminder that time never waited for anyone. On his desk, contracts were spread in careful rows, asset lists, transfer proposals, exit strategies. He had built his career on speed, on moving before anyone else realized what was happening. Now he was moving again. Emails went out to private buyers before noon. Quiet inquiries, off-market interest. He framed it as restructuring, a strategic pivot. Nothing dramatic, nothing suspicious. Just a man protecting what was his. But the responses came back slower than usual. One investor hesitated. Another asked for clarification. A third went silent altogether. Victor frowned, fingers tapping the desk. He picked up his phone and dialed his attorney. There's a complication, the lawyer said after a pause. The title is flagged. What does that mean? Victor snapped. It means something unresolved is attached to the land, the attorney replied carefully. We can't move forward until it's cleared. Victor's chest tightened. Cleared by who? By whoever has standing, the lawyer said, and right now, that isn't you. Victor ended the call without another word. His jaw clenched as realization began to surface, slow and unwelcome. He replayed the last few weeks in his mind. Claire's silence, her refusal to sign, her sudden appearance at the gala. She hadn't been grieving. She had been waiting. Across town, Claire sat at a small desk in her hotel room. Ethan's voice steady through her laptop speakers. Documents moved digitally now, filed with precision. Notices sent, protections triggered. Nothing flashy, just process. He's trying to sell, Ethan said. But he can't. The land title is clouded. Buyers won't touch it. Claire nodded, her hands calm as she closed her laptop. Let him try, she said. Every move he makes just leaves a trail. Outside her window, the city shifted toward evening. Somewhere inside his office, Victor was beginning to understand something he had never accounted for. Power didn't always announce itself. Sometimes it waited quietly, bound by patience and law, until the moment someone else made the wrong move. Victor had just made his. And for the first time since he threw Claire out of the mansion, the future he thought he controlled was no longer moving in his direction. The boardroom was quiet in the way expensive rooms always were. thick glass walls, polished wood, chairs that seemed designed to remind people who belonged at the table. Victor sat at the head, posture rigid, eyes fixed on the door. He expected lawyers. He expected paperwork. He did not expect Margaret Whitmore. She entered without hesitation, dressed simply. Her presence unannounced but unquestioned. Age had not softened her. It had refined her. She didn't look at Victor as she took a seat across from him. She placed her handbag on the table with deliberate care, as if claiming space that had always been hers. Victor stood halfway. This meeting was not scheduled. Margaret raised a hand. He stopped. "I won't take much of your time," she said calmly, "but I will take your attention." The attorneys exchanged glances. Ethan stepped into the room behind her carrying a slim folder. Claire was not there. That absence unsettled Victor more than anything else. Margaret opened the folder herself. "You built a house," she continued, her voice level. "A very expensive one. You built it on land that did not belong to you. You assumed no one would challenge that assumption." Victor scoffed. "With respect, Mrs. Whitmore, I've reviewed the agreements." "I'm sure you have," Margaret replied. "What you didn't review was me." She slid a document across the table, then another, and another. Trust confirmations, historical deeds, activation clauses. Each page is heavier than the last. Victor's confidence began to fracture. "Claire waived her authority," he said. "Voluntarily." Margaret nodded once. "And you violated the conditions that made that waiver valid." Silence pressed down on the room. "You cheated," Margaret continued. "You concealed assets. You attempted to coerce new signatures under duress. In doing so, you reactivated every right my daughter chose not to exercise." Victor looked to his lawyers. None met his eyes. "She won't do this," Victor said, his voice tight. "Claire doesn't want conflict." Margaret finally looked at him then. Her gaze was cold, assessing. "You mistake restraint for weakness," she said, "a common error among men who confuse power with noise." She stood, gathering her papers. "This is not revenge. This is a correction." As she turned to leave, Margaret paused. "You should prepare to vacate the property," she added. "Soon." The door closed behind her with a soft, final sound. Victor remained standing, staring at the empty chair across from him, realizing too late that the woman he had feared least was the one who had just ended him. The fallout didn't explode. It unraveled. Victor expected confrontation, lawsuits, public drama. What he didn't expect was silence, the kind that spreads quietly and leaves nothing standing. By the end of the week, meetings began to cancel themselves. No explanations, no rescheduling, just polite emails thanking him for his time. A partner who once answered calls within minutes now let them ring until voicemail. Another asked for documents that had never been requested before. Due diligence, they called it. Victor felt it immediately. The shift. The subtle recalculation in people's eyes. Investors didn't accuse, they didn't argue. They simply stepped back, the way animals do when they sense instability beneath the ground. A rumor surfaced first, then another. Nothing concrete. Just enough. Title complications. Family trust issues. Unresolved ownership. Victor spent hours on the phone, reassuring, deflecting, smiling through clenched teeth. He framed it as a misunderstanding, a temporary delay. But confidence, once cracked, doesn't hold weight, especially not in rooms where everyone knows how fast fortunes can reverse. Avery noticed the change before he admitted it. "You seem distracted," she said one evening, standing in the living room of the mansion as if it were already hers. "Is something wrong?" Victor waved her off. "It's handled." But she watched him now. Listen more closely. She noticed the way he avoided specifics, the way he stopped talking about expansion and started talking about patience. At lunch the next day, an old associate leaned in and lowered his voice. "Off the record," he said. "You might want to clear the land issue before pushing anything else." Victor's smile froze. "What land issue?" The man hesitated, then shrugged. If it's nothing, it'll pass. It didn't pass. By Friday, Avery was quieter. By Sunday, she was distant. The certainty she once carried had softened into calculation. She didn't ask about Claire anymore. She asked about timelines, about liquidity, about safeguards. Victor answered vaguely. That night, alone in the mansion, Victor stood by the window and looked out over the city. The view hadn't changed. The house hadn't changed. But something essential had shifted. The sense of inevitability, the belief that things would always bend his way. Across town, Claire read the updates Ethan sent with measured calm. No celebration, no gloating, just confirmation. The crowd hadn't turned against Victor. It had simply stopped standing with him. And in that quiet withdrawal, the consequences he had avoided his entire life were finally beginning to arrive. Claire stood in the empty living room just after sunrise, keys cool and heavy in her palm. The mansion felt different without Victor's voice filling the corners, without the low hum of his certainty. Light spilled across the floors she had chosen, the walls she had once softened with art and quiet intention. She had the right to change the locks. She had the authority to evict. She had the leverage to humiliate him the way he had humiliated her. Ethan waited near the doorway, careful not to intrude. "The court order is ready," he said. "If you want to proceed now, we can." Claire didn't answer right away. She walked to the window and looked out at the city, the skyline steady and unmoved by anyone's rise or fall. For weeks she had imagined this moment as a release, as victory, as something loud. Instead, it felt calm. "I don't want to rush this," she said finally. Ethan studied her. "You're allowed to be angry." "I am," Claire replied. "That's why I won't act on it." She thought of the nights she had swallowed words to keep the peace, the dinners she had hosted while feeling invisible, the silence she had chosen because it felt safer than confrontation. She had learned what restraint could cost, but she had also learned what it could preserve. Victor wanted a spectacle, a fight he could frame as mutual destruction. If she moved too fast, he would turn it into proof that she was exactly what he had painted her to be. Claire set the keys down on the table. "Let the law finish what it started," she said. "No shortcuts. No scenes." Ethan nodded, a flicker of respect crossing his face. "That will take longer." "I know." They walked through the house together, not as owners reclaiming territory, but as witnesses closing a chapter. Claire paused in the study, running her fingers along the desk where Victor had once spread contracts and dreams that weren't built on truth. "I loved him," she said quietly. Ethan didn't rush to fill the silence. "I don't regret loving him," Claire continued. "I regret believing that love meant shrinking." She left the mansion without turning back, stepping into the morning air lighter than she had felt in years. She wasn't retreating. She was choosing the long road, the one that couldn't be twisted into a headline. Behind her, the house stood still, waiting for its future to be decided not by force, but by consequence. And for the first time, Claire understood the difference between power taken and power held. The morning Victor was told to leave, the mansion was painfully quiet. No shouting. No arguments. No dramatic confrontation. Just a uniformed officer at the gate, a court order clipped neatly to a folder, and the sound of Victor's name spoken in a tone that didn't care who he used to be. "You have 48 hours, the officer said. "After that, you'll be trespassing." Victor stood in the driveway, phone pressed to his ear, voice sharp with disbelief. "This is a misunderstanding," he repeated. "There has to be some mistake." There wasn't. Inside the house, Avery moved through the rooms with quick, restless steps, opening drawers, closing them again, scanning closets as if value might suddenly reveal itself. Her movements were efficient now. Practical. She wasn't decorating a future anymore. She was inventorying an exit. "They can't do this," Victor said, pacing. "I built this place." Avery didn't answer right away. When she did, her voice was careful. Then why are they letting you leave? The question hung between them. Victor snapped at her, something sharp and defensive, but the words didn't land the way they used to. Avery was already pulling a suitcase from the guest room, her confidence thinning with every step. By evening, the truth settled in. No one was coming to fix this. The investors hadn't called back. The lawyers had stopped promising miracles. The house staff moved quietly, avoiding eye contact, following instructions that no longer came from him. Victor carried his belongings out himself, not much considering how large his life had once looked. Clothing, a laptop, personal items he'd never bothered to value until now. At the gate, he paused. For a moment he looked back at the mansion, its windows dark, its presence unchanged. It didn't look like a prize anymore. It looked like something finished. The gate closed behind him with the same soft finality it had once closed behind Claire. Only this time, there was no shock, just humiliation. Across town, Claire received the message from Ethan without ceremony. It's done. He's out. She read it once, then set her phone down. No smile, no triumph. Just a slow, steady exhale. Not relief, release. Victor stood on the sidewalk with his suitcase, waiting for a car that took longer than it should have. People passed him without recognition, without curiosity, without respect. For the first time, the city didn't see him as important. It saw him as finished. Avery didn't leave immediately. For 2 days after Victor was forced out, she stayed in the mansion as if occupancy alone might restore what had been lost. She slept in the master bedroom, wore the silk robes she once believed symbolized arrival, and made calls from the balcony overlooking the city, lowering her voice whenever conversations turned quiet too fast. She was waiting for reassurance. It never came. The messages slowed first. Invitations quietly withdrawn. Friends who once responded with emojis and enthusiasm now replied with polite delays. One brand collaboration she had hinted at for weeks suddenly required a reassessment of alignment. Alignment was always the word people used when they meant risk. On the third morning, Avery finally called Victor. "Where are you?" she asked. There was a pause on the line, then his answer shorter than she expected, less certain. Temporary place. Temporary had never been part of her plan. "You said this was handled," she said carefully. "You said it was a delay." Victor exhaled sharply. "I need time." Time. The one thing Avery had never invested in anything without a guaranteed return. She ended the call without an argument, without tears. She walked through the mansion one last time, stopping in rooms she had once imagined hosting parties in. Now they felt oversized, hollow, like sets after a production wraps. She packed selectively, jewelry she could resell, dresses with resale value, shoes she knew she could turn into liquidity. Anything that reminded her of Claire's taste she left behind. Sentiment was not transferable. At the gate, she hesitated. Not because she cared, but because leaving confirmed something she didn't want to name. She had never loved Victor. She had loved what he represented. Across town, Victor scrolled through his phone, watching Avery's social media change in real time. Photos archived, captions edited, her narrative adjusting, detaching itself from him with practiced grace. By evening, she was gone. No note, no goodbye, no apology. Just absence. Victor sat alone in a rented apartment that smelled faintly of fresh paint and unfamiliarity. The walls were bare. The silence is loud. He replayed every decision that had brought him here, searching for the moment things turned. It wasn't when Claire fought back. It was when he believed power made him untouchable. Avery didn't look back as her car merged into traffic. She had already begun imagining her next chapter, unburdened by loyalty or consequence. Victor, meanwhile, stared at a future stripped of admiration, realizing too late that the woman who stayed through nothing was gone, and the woman who came for everything had taken exactly what she wanted. Claire didn't move back into the mansion right away. That surprised everyone. Instead, she rented a small apartment on the Upper West Side, the kind with uneven floors and radiators that hissed at night. It was quiet, manageable, honest, the opposite of the life she had been living. She wanted space that didn't echo with memories that weren't hers anymore. The first night there, she slept on a mattress on the floor. No art on the walls, no decorative pillows chosen for guests, just a lamp, a folded blanket, and the sound of the city outside her window, reminding her that life continued whether she was ready or not. Mornings became simple. She woke early, made coffee in a chipped mug. I sat by the window and watched people walk their dogs, argue softly, laugh without performing for anyone. She ordered a few essentials online, opening each Amazon box slowly, deliberately, as if rebuilding her world piece by piece. One afternoon, she unpacked a Kindle she hadn't touched in years. The screen lit up, familiar and comforting. She opened Atomic Habits and began reading without rushing, underlining lines about identity and change, not because she needed motivation, but because she needed permission to start small. Ethan checked in occasionally, never pushing, never offering solutions she hadn't asked for. Sometimes they talked about legal updates, other times they talked about nothing important at all. The weather, a restaurant he missed, a book she was halfway through. Claire noticed how different that felt. There was no urgency, no pressure to be impressive, no silent scorecard tracking what she owed in return. Some nights, grief returned without warning. She would sit on the floor, back against the couch, letting the weight of it pass through her instead of fighting it. She learned that healing wasn't dramatic, it was repetitive, uncomfortable, quiet. Weeks later, she visited the mansion briefly with Ethan to finalize paperwork. Walking through it now felt strange. The rooms were still beautiful, but they no longer felt like a destination. They felt like a chapter she had outgrown. As she left, Claire paused at the door and rested her hand against the frame. Not in farewell, in acknowledgement. That place had held her while she learned who she wasn't. This new life, small, imperfect, unfinished, was teaching her who she could be. For the first time in a long while, Claire inhaled deeply, without fear of what the next breath might bring. She wasn't rebuilding to prove anything. She was rebuilding to stay. Claire didn't notice the shift at first. It wasn't a moment, it wasn't a confession. It was the accumulation of small things that didn't ask for anything in return. Ethan began stopping by the apartment more often, usually with no agenda. Sometimes he brought takeout from a place near his office. Other times just a book he thought she might like. They ate at the small kitchen table, knees nearly touching, talking about everything except the past, until the past slowly lost its power. There was no rescue in his presence. That was the difference. Ethan never tried to fix what Victor had broken. He never reframed her pain as strength or rushed her toward forgiveness. When Claire went quiet, he let the silence exist. When she spoke, he listened without interrupting, without turning her story into a lesson. One evening, rain streaked down the windows as they sat on the floor, backs against the couch. Claire talked about the night she'd been thrown out, about the sound of the gate closing behind her. She expected pity. What she received instead was understanding. That kind of humiliation changes how you trust, Ethan said softly. It doesn't mean you're damaged, it means you learned. Claire looked at him then, really looked, at the lines around his eyes, at the patience in his posture. By the way, he didn't lean closer, didn't take advantage of vulnerability. He simply stayed. Weeks passed. Their relationship unfolded without declarations, no grand gestures. No promises carved into the future. Just consistency, respect, choice. Claire noticed how her body felt around him, unbraced, calm. She didn't rehearse conversations in advance. She didn't measure herself. One night, as they walked along the river, Ethan stopped and faced her. "I need to say something," he said. And you don't have to answer. Claire nodded. I care about you, he continued, but I don't want to be another chapter where you survive. I want to be someone you choose when you're ready. The words settled gently, without pressure. Claire didn't cry. She didn't hesitate. She simply took his hand. I'm choosing, she said. They didn't kiss right away. They stood there, fingers intertwined, city lights reflecting on the water, letting the moment be exactly what it was. Real, unforced, earned. For the first time, love didn't feel like a performance or a negotiation. It felt like safety, and Claire understood then that the greatest reward she could receive wasn't restitution or vindication. It was the freedom to love without shrinking herself, to be worthy of it. Claire made the decision quietly. There was no announcement, no press release, no victory lap. She didn't even tell Ethan at first. She sat alone at the small desk in her apartment, laptop open, sunlight drifting across the floor, and reviewed the final valuation reports one last time. The mansion was worth more than she had expected. The market loved a redemption story, especially one wrapped in glass and marble. Advisors encouraged her to keep it, to leverage it, to live in it, as proof of triumph. She closed the file. Keeping the house would mean keeping the war alive. The mansion carried too many echoes. Victor's voice. The dinners that felt like auditions, the nights she learned how to disappear without leaving. It was a symbol, yes, but not of victory, of endurance. Claire called Ethan that afternoon. I'm selling the house, she said simply. There was a pause, not surprising, consideration. And the land? He asked. I'm keeping it, Claire replied. All of it. The plan unfolded with precision. The sale was clean, public, unemotional. The land remained untouched, protected inside the trust, its value long-term and unexploited. Where Victor had seen spectacle, Claire saw continuity. She directed a portion of the proceeds into a foundation focused on legal education and asset protection for women navigating divorce and inheritance disputes. Not charity framed as apology, but infrastructure framed as prevention. The response was immediate. Quiet respect. The kind that doesn't trend but lasts. Victor heard about the sale through a third party. It unsettled him more than eviction ever had. The house had been his final tether to relevance. Watching Claire dismantle it calmly, profitably, without bitterness, stripped the last excuse from his narrative. She wasn't reacting to him. She was moving past him. On the day the papers closed, Claire walked the perimeter of the land alone. No photographers, no audience, just wind through trees and the steady ground beneath her feet. She placed her palm against the earth, feeling something solid and unchanged. This wasn't loss. This was selection. By choosing what to release and what to protect, Claire ended the conflict on her terms. She didn't need to defeat Victor publicly. She had already removed him from the equation. The war was over because she stopped fighting for symbols, and in their place she claimed something far more powerful. Direction. The wedding wasn't announced. There were no glossy invitations, no headlines, no carefully staged photos meant to signal success to people who didn't matter. Claire chose a quiet autumn afternoon when the air felt honest and the city softened into something almost gentle. It took place near the edge of the land she had kept. Not the mansion, not the symbol, the ground. A small group gathered beneath tall trees, just beginning to turn gold. Her mother stood near the front, expression unreadable but eyes steady. Ethan waited a few steps away, hands loosely folded, not nervous, just present. Claire walked toward him without rushing. She didn't wear anything extravagant, no couture, no statement pieces. Just a simple dress that moved when she did, chosen for comfort rather than effect. For the first time, she wasn't performing a version of herself meant to be admired. She was simply arriving. When Ethan took her hands, he didn't promise protection or forever. He promised partnership. He promised honesty even when it was uncomfortable. He promised that if one of them grew, The other would make room instead of asking them to shrink. Claire spoke last. "I've learned what it costs to confuse love with silence," she said. "I've learned what happens when I abandon myself to keep peace. I won't do that again. Not with you. Not with anyone." Ethan smiled, not triumphant, not relieved, just certain. Afterward, there was no reception hall, no speeches crafted for applause. They shared food at long wooden tables. People talked, laughed, stayed until the light faded naturally. No one rushed to leave. No one checked their phones. Margaret watched from a distance, a glass of wine in her hand. When Claire joined her, she spoke quietly. "You chose well." It wasn't an apology. It didn't need to be. Later that evening, Claire and Ethan walked the land alone. The ground was cool beneath their feet. The future felt open, not demanding. Claire thought of everything she had lost. The house, the illusion, the version of herself that had tried to earn love through endurance. None of it felt like sacrifice anymore. She hadn't been rewarded with wealth or status or vindication. She had been rewarded with alignment, with a life that fits. Somewhere across the city, Victor continued explaining himself to people who no longer listened. His story had run out of momentum. There were no more villains to blame, no more symbols to cling to. Claire didn't think of him at all. She had everything she was meant to receive, and for the first time, she knew exactly why. Years later, people would tell the story wrong. They would say Claire Whitmore won because she was patient, or because she was lucky, or because she had powerful people behind her. The truth was quieter. On a clear morning, Claire stood at the edge of the land, now open and alive in a way it had never been before. Where the mansion once dominated the view, there was space, trees, pathways, a small community building where legal workshops were held for women who had never been taught how ownership worked. She watched as people arrived, some confident, some nervous, some carrying folders the way she once had, as if paper alone could protect them. Claire greeted a few by name, then stepped back, content to remain unseen. Ethan joined her, slipping his hand into hers without ceremony. They had learned that love didn't need constant confirmation. It lived in rhythm, not display. "Do you ever think about him?" Ethan asked, not out of jealousy, but curiosity. Claire considered the question honestly. "No," she said, "not anymore." Victor Langston's name still surfaced occasionally, usually in the context of what not to do. A failed venture, a cautionary tale passed quietly between investors. He rented smaller spaces now, spoke in softer tones, blamed circumstances he never fully named. The world hadn't punished him dramatically. It had simply stopped rewarding him. That was the justice he never anticipated. Claire looked down at the ground beneath her feet. The same ground Victor had built on, exploited, assumed would always hold him up no matter how recklessly he moved. Land didn't work that way. It responded to care, to respect, to be patient. The ground remembers, her father used to say, not people's stories, their actions. She had once been thrown out with a suitcase and a lie, made to believe she had no claim to the life she was living. Now she stood on something unshakable, not because she had fought harder, but because she had chosen truth over noise. Claire turned toward the building as the session began. She didn't introduce herself as an example. She didn't tell her story unless someone asked. Empowerment, she had learned, wasn't about spectacle. It was about giving others the tools to stand before they were pushed. As she walked inside, sunlight filtered through the windows. Warm and steady, Ethan followed beside her. The future waited, not demanding proof, not asking for sacrifice. Just presence. Some stories end with revenge. Some end with forgiveness. Hers ended with something far rarer. A life no one could take from her again. So, the story has come to an end. And if you're still here with me right now, truly still here, then something in this journey touched your heart in a quiet way. Maybe you saw a part of yourself in Claire. Maybe you remembered a moment when you stayed silent to keep the peace. Or maybe you realized how easy it is to give away power without even knowing it. The deeper lesson of this story isn't about money, land, or revenge. It's about self-respect. The Stoic philosopher Marcus Aurelius once wrote, "You have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this, and you will find strength." Claire didn't heal by destroying her enemy. She healed by reclaiming herself, by choosing truth over approval, alignment over appearance. Life will test us. People will misunderstand us. Sometimes we'll be pushed out of places we thought were home. But as Epictetus reminded us, circumstances don't make the man. They only reveal him. What matters is what we choose next. If this story resonated with you, take it as a reminder. You don't need to rush, perform, or prove your worth. You only need to stay true. And if this story spoke to you, please like, share, and subscribe to the channel. Your support helps us tell more stories that heal, not just entertain. Thank you for staying until the end.